Star Wars Outlaws and Starfield. Two massive budget AAA open world sci-fi games that failed to captivate audiences over the past year. But which game is worse? That's what we're going to be discussing today. So let's compare the gameplay, cringe factor, immersion, and more to decide this race to the bottom. Without further ado, let's buckle up, grab some iced coffee, and dive into the video. So let's start off with the most important part of any video game, the gameplay. Which of these titles does gameplay better? Well, it is worth pointing out that these are slightly different types of games. Starfield is an RPG, while Outlaws is a stealth action game. But there are also a ton of similarities. Both games are open-world sci-fi space games with ship combat, futuristic weaponry, similar exploration loops, and a ton of side content. When it comes to weapon variety, Starfield is far better than Star Wars Outlaws. Now, this doesn't mean that Starfield is great in this department. I pointed out in my review last year that Bethesda was kind of unimaginative when it came to crafting the guns in this game. A lot of the weapons were ported directly from Fallout, with very little unique or fresh takes on a futuristic arsenal. Games like Cyberpunk 2077 and Mass Effect simply outclassed Starfield by a country mile. But compared to Star Wars Outlaws, Starfield is really packing the heat. In Outlaws, you only get one gun for the entire game, a blaster pistol. Sure, it has different firing modes, but you can't really craft a unique loadout for your playthrough because you're always limited to one weapon. You can pick up blaster rifles and heavy weapons dropped by enemies, but you only get one clip per gun, and if you perform basically any action in the environment at all, such as climbing a ladder or hacking something, then Kay will just drop the weapon. Maybe the life of an outlaw isn't right for Kay. She could try to develop a new career path with today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is the best platform for learning back-end web development. One of the biggest issues with learning any kind of programming is overcoming boredom, so Boot.dev took an approach of game design to make their development courses fun and rewarding. Boot.dev's lessons are self-paced and feel like a captivating RPG. As you complete coding assignments, you will earn XP, achievements, and complete quests on your journey to become a max-level back-end developer. And the best part is there's no fluff. You'll get hands-on practical coding experience from the get-go, because the best way to learn coding is to start writing code and shipping projects. So you'll be writing tons of code in Python and Go. In today's technology-driven world, building technical skills is king. And in this environment, programmers have amazing earning potential. In fact, the median salary in the US for back-end developers last year was over $100,000. Plus, programmers often have the flexibility to work from home. So if you're looking to make a career change, or just learn a new set of skills, then now is a great time to get started with Boot.dev. It's free to create an account and demo the courses. Click the link in the description box and use my code BigDanGaming to get 25% off your first payment for Boot.dev. That's 25% off your first month or your first year, depending on the subscription you choose. So as much as I hate to say it, Star Wars Outlaws actually made me appreciate the weaponry in Starfield a lot more when I reinstalled the game this month. We truly are in a race to the bottom with AAA games now, huh? When it comes to stealth gameplay, however, Outlaws has more tricks up its sleeve. You can use your rat companion Nyx to distract enemies, attack guards, rig traps, or fetch items for you. You can also perform melee takedowns with unintentionally hilarious girl boss animations. Kay can just punch a heavily armored stormtrooper with her bare fists. Nothing immersion breaking about that at all, right? It reminds me of Adam Jensen's over-the-top takedown animations in Deus Ex Human Revolution, but at least in that game, Jensen had bionic arm implants that he never asked for.
I never asked for this.
So at least his superhuman strength made sense from a lore standpoint. Bethesda, on the other hand, hasn't innovated its stealth gameplay since Oblivion, which came out in 2006. Basically, you can crouch to sneak, and yeah, that's about it. There are no melee takedowns or other mechanics to flesh out the stealth gameplay. It would be kind of nice to see Bethesda try something new, anything new in the stealth department, but alas, perhaps I'm asking for too much. So I have to give it to Star Wars Outlaws. The game has better stealth, but to be honest, the bar was incredibly low here. And compared to other stealth-oriented games like Hitman, Metal Gear Solid 5, or even Ubisoft's own Far Cry franchise, Outlaws looks like a complete joke. A lot of this has to do with their horrible insta-fail mission design that plagues the main story of Star Wars Outlaws. There are a ton of missions in this game where if you are spotted or trigger an alarm, you immediately get sent back to a checkpoint. Straight up early 2010s mission design on full display here. To Starfield's credit, even though the stealth mechanics aren't really fleshed out, at least there are no missions where you'll immediately fail, unless of course you get killed by an enemy. Some missions will even have optional objectives that you can fail and get a different outcome to the quest, which adds a bit of flavor to the game.
That's one big son of a bitch!
Did you talk with Davis? How'd it go? He's what? My sensors? Oh god.
Enemy AI in both these games is pretty terrible, to be honest. In Star Wars Outlaws, the enemies basically have lore-accurate stormtrooper aim, missing 99% of their shots even in close range. But the enemy detection AI is superhuman, with enemies spotting you even when you are completely out of their vision cones. You know, just to add an extra degree of frustration to these dogshit stealth missions. Also, if one enemy detects you, every single other enemy instantly knows where you are. Starfield enemies just kind of stand in one place and shoot at you. Maybe they'll occasionally try to flank, but this game's big problem is that every enemy is a ridiculous bullet sponge. And because Starfield has like 97 different ammo types, it can be a struggle to keep your primary weapon topped up without constantly running back to shops to buy up more ammunition. Which of course brings us to space travel and loading screens. Starfield was heavily criticized for its excessive amount of immersion-breaking loading screens. You also couldn't fly directly into a planet's atmosphere, as players soon discovered the space zones were a separate skybox, and the planets in the background were basically just PNGs. Pretty much the only thing you can do in Starfield's space zones is fly to a nearby place to fast travel or engage in ship combat. The ship combat in Starfield is certainly serviceable, but a bit janky and unsatisfying too. So Star Wars Outlaws does manage to exceed this insanely low bar in this regard. Flying to a planet is greeted with a more seamless loading screen animation, and fast travel is much quicker once you've actually visited all the planets. It's basically the same premise as Starfield, with a couple less steps, which is technically an improvement. And you know what else is an improvement? Smashing the like button on this video and subscribing to Big Dan Gaming. I make RPG and action game videos, so be sure to subscribe if you want to see more. Anyhow, Outlaw's ship combat is a bit more fluid and intuitive as well, but that's not really saying much. Space exploration is also incredibly lackluster in Outlaws, as pretty much all you can find in outer space is floating cargo to loot. The space areas just don't feel fleshed out at all, and are just kind of a waste of time to explore. Speaking of which, let's talk about open world exploration. Starfield has hundreds of procedurally generated, empty, open worlds without anything interesting to explore. You can find copy-pasted caves, copy-pasted settlements with nameless NPCs, and copy-pasted buildings occupied by baddies. Oh, and rocks. Lots of rocks. Star Wars Outlaws, on the other hand, has a handful of handcrafted, yet seemingly still empty and boring open worlds. This game has the same copy-pasted crap from other Ubisoft games. Enemy outposts, randomized pirate raids, environmental puzzles to find chests, etc. 90% of the open world content in this game simply isn't worth doing unless it leads to some sort of major upgrade for your character. So exploration in both of these games is a huge L, and it's extremely disappointing considering both of these games were marketed for their open world content, which falls well short of other games in the genre, even from their own studios. Far Cry 3 and Fallout 4 are far more interesting worlds to explore than Star Wars Outlaws and Starfield. Immersion is one of those intangible things that is kinda hard to define, but you know it when you feel it. But at its core, games that fully allow you to get lost in their world are immersive, and anything that takes you out of that experience is immersion breaking. This could be anything from bugs and glitches, to janky facial animations, bad writing, a cluttered UI, or something so unbelievable that you're immediately reminded that you are in fact playing a video game. Both Starfield and Star Wars Outlaws have their fair share of immersion breaking things, but which experience is less immersive? Well, one big factor of immersion for me, especially in an open world game, is how much you can interact with the world. Can you take actions as a player that cause NPCs or objects within the world to react to you? Let's say, for example, you pull out your weapon and point it at a bystander. Do they react in a way you would expect them to, or do they simply pay no attention to you? In Starfield, most of your actions cause no reaction in the world, unless you commit violence against an NPC. If you point a gun, or even fire it near other characters, nobody will react, not even the police. However, if you attack an NPC, then the police will intervene and try to take you out.
Just one quiet day. Too much to ask for. UC security, stand down!
This is a pretty immersion-breaking thing, right? Well, it's actually even worse in Star Wars Outlaws. If you attack NPCs, not only are they invincible, but they have absolutely no reaction whatsoever. Detonate grenades, shoot NPCs, etc., nothing happens. We've already demonstrated that Starfield has unrealistic world interactions, but at least you can go on a rampage against unnamed NPCs and rack up a bounty. But in Star Wars Outlaws, a game about being a criminal, the only criminal activity you can commit is stealing from gangs or the police. It's the politically safe type of crime. Swimming underwater is also impossible in both Starfield and Outlaws. Again, the ever-narrowing scope of world interactivity in open-world games is on full display here. You can explore the expanses of the galaxy, but diving below the surface of a lake was too much to ask, even though you could do this as far back as Oblivion. But it's actually even worse in Star Wars Outlaws. In Starfield, you could at least swim on the surface of the water, but if you step into a body of water in Ubisoft's latest game, you instantly die. Both of these games also have awful face animations that give Mass Effect Andromeda a run for its money. Starfield's randomly generated NPCs are particularly horrifying, and some of the game's jankiest cutscenes still haven't been fixed over a year after release.
You're back. You did not respond when I called to you after you pulled out the artifact. Does that mean Barrett's theory and experience were correct? The artifact grants the first person who touches it a vision?
But don't think for a second that Outlaws is any better in this category. Kay's animations teeter between lifeless and horrifying. It's not even Uncanny Valley, it's just bad. So my final verdict for the immersion category is that Star Wars Outlaws is worse than Starfield. God, how far we have fallen in AAA gaming. When it comes to writing and quest content, both Starfield and Star Wars Outlaws are pretty lackluster. Outlaws is a relatively milquetoast story about a heist against a criminal overlord, and Starfield is some overly drawn-out multiverse bullshit. If I had to choose one, I would say that Starfield is slightly better. I will give Starfield some credit for a few of its side quests, however. I really enjoyed the corporate espionage questline, the dispute between the colony ship and the resort planet, and the pirate questline. There was certainly room for improvement in those last two in terms of the choices you could make, but at least the writing was interesting enough to keep me invested, which is more than I can say for any of the quests in Outlaws. So at the end of the day, I gotta give it to Ubisoft. Star Wars Outlaws is a worse game than Starfield. As underwhelming as Starfield was compared to games like Cyberpunk or earlier Bethesda games, at least the gameplay and quests were interesting enough to keep me going for a bit longer. If Star Wars Outlaws is a dumpster fire, then Starfield is like a small dryer fire. Both games are pretty bad, but Outlaws is definitely worse. So there you have it. My comparison of two massive AAA sci-fi flops. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to Big Dan Gaming for more RPG and action game videos. Big shout out to all the channel members for supporting my content. Until next time, this has been Big Dan. I should go.